Name is Heather White. I'm a former Montessori classroom teacher, administrator, and in-home caregiver with more than 15 years of experience in the world of Montessori. Currently, I work in multiple capacities. I'm an educational coach. I work in lots of different roles with the Center for Guided Montessori Studies, including as their alumni conference and webinar coordinator, as well as their accreditation associate. I'm also an instructional guide for them, supporting adult learners who are working to receive their Montessori certification. I am also delighted to announce that I am an adjunct professor at Sarasota University, which is the only accredited institution of higher education dedicated solely to Montessori that is also accredited by MACT. And I'm a blog writer and content creator for several organizations, including the American Montessori Society. I have an AMS credential at the 3 to 6 and 6 to 9 age levels, and also experience working with the 0 to 3 and 9 to 12 and adolescent populations as well. I have a national certification of school psychology, and I've obtained a master's in education with a concentration in Montessori studies, in addition to an education specialist degree in school psychology. I've also received certification in anti-bias, anti-racism from the American Montessori Society, and nationally as a Montessori coach from the National Center for Montessori in the Public Sector. Okay, enough about me. What are we going to talk about in our time together today? So we're going to cover a range of topics, starting with identifying what sensitive periods are and why they matter. We'll then discuss the characteristics of sensitive periods and the timing when these sensibilities occur. We'll review some common examples of sensibilities for elementary age children, helping you to recognize them in the children that you care for. And then we'll close with some resources for how you can learn more about these critical periods in a child's development. I wanted to first share a quote with you from Dr. Maria Montessori herself about sensitive periods. If you've been to one of my sessions in the past, you know I love to start and end a session this way because I feel like it really provides us a lot of inspiration and grounding for our conversation. So in her book, The Secret of Childhood, Dr. Maria Montessori states, a child learns to adjust himself and make acquisitions in his sensitive periods. These are like a beam that lights interiorly or a battery that furnishes energy. It is this sensibility which enables a child to come into contact with the external world in a particularly intense manner. At such a time, everything is easy. All is life and enthusiasm. Every effort marks an increase in power. Only when the goal has been obtained does fatigue and the weight of indifference come on. So I shared just a portion of the quote on screen for you with some beautiful pictures, but really a child who is meeting their sensitive periods is this joy that you see radiating on screen. It's like they have this beam of light that is bursting from within, or she says, a battery that furnishes energy. They're just never fatigued. They have this constant motion to try to gain this new skill or obtain this new knowledge. And only when they have met that goal or reached that goal do they then experience fatigue or this indifference about this task that they were once so enthusiastic to accomplish. The Dutch biologist Hugo de Vries was actually the first person to notice sensitive periods in development when he was referring to a species of caterpillar. He noted that the baby caterpillars had a special sensitivity to light, and when they emerged from their eggs on the trunk of the tree, that sensitivity caused them to immediately be drawn to the tips of the branches so that they could eat the new tender buds. They weren't yet ready for those tougher, older leaves. Once the sensitivity was lost, once they became bigger and stronger, then they were able to migrate and move back towards the trunk of the tree to eat those tougher, older leaves. But it was that sensitive period when they were first born that immediately led them to the tips of the branches. And it's interesting that he noted that the disappearance of this sensitivity was equally as important as its presence. It was equally as important that they were able to access those tougher, older leaves, right? The larger leaves as they grew to get the nutrients they needed, as it was that the sensitive period was there when they were born to be able to access these smaller, newer, more tender buds that they were able to consume when they were first born. So the arrival or the appearance of the sensitive period is equally as important as its disappearance, he said. And Dr. Maria Montessori philosophized based on Hugo de Vries' discovery that similar things happen in childhood. And contemporary research actually does verify this and shows that children do indeed pass through certain critical periods that are conducive to them developing specific skills. They're like windows of opportunity during which each child's brain is particularly efficient at very specific types of learning. And that's why at particular times, children show intense, overwhelming interest in certain objects or activities, which at a later time seem a little boring to them. They seem disinterested. That fatigue and indifference Maria Montessori talked about comes into play. So around 100 years ago, when Maria Montessori started borrowing these ideas from Hugo de Vries and other biologists, physicians, and philosophers like Sagun and Itard, she started proposing that each and every child carries within them two types of genetic designs. One is physical, and one is what she called psychical. The physical plan is what determines the child's physical attributes, things like their height, their hair color, their eye color, where the psychical plan takes the form of the sensitive period. So, what we're going to explore today. For those of you who might not have been here, I did a previous session on sensitive periods for young children. But let's take a look at what sensitive periods are for those of you who might not have been here for that. So they are really critical to a child's development, like we've been saying. They inform much of what we do as Montessorians. Much of our practice is based on an understanding of sensitive periods and child development as a whole. It can really guide our parenting, caregiving, and educating practices in positive ways. So the term sensitive periods is used to define a really particular phase in development in which children are more open, interested, motivated even, and capable of learning these particular concepts or developing very particular skills. During these spans of time, during these sensitive periods, a child might be described as having this unquenchable passion for mastering these skills or for gathering this knowledge, right, that are happening during this phase. They're motivated by this really intense internal drive. And Maria Montessori describes sensitive periods as a burning intellectual love or an animated psychic factor leading to an immense mental activity and a drama of love between the child and the environment. Sounds so magical, right? And it's this really intense interaction occurring. And so these sensitive periods create these irresistible urges for children for learning. And they're motivated by these inner forces. And because of that, they will engage in activities repetitively, unceasingly, and without this fatigue. There's so much enthusiasm for what they're trying to accomplish. Sensitive periods, like I said, can really help us as adults to better understand children. It helps us to identify their interests and to, as Maria Montessori says, follow the child, because it allows us to introduce activities that align with those interests that we're observing, which then further promotes a child's brain development by way of the creation of what Maria Montessori called a prepared environment. So we're creating this space based on what we identify as the child's interests and needs through observation. And then by creating that environment, the child is able to engage with the space and the materials in a way that further supports their development. So each of these sensitive periods really gives us this unique opportunity to greatly influence a child's growth. So then what do sensitive periods look like? Some sensitive periods begin early in a child's life, but there are others that are specific for elementary age children. And some of them are so noticeable that even if you were unfamiliar with the Montessori method, you'll likely be able to recognize them. For example, a child sensitive period for socialization or social relationships likely is very evident for any of you who have lived or worked with elementary age students, because children at this age start to seek out their peers. They'd rather spend time with their friends, collaborating, forming friendships, establishing these group norms than they had being or playing alone or with family. They're really craving that peer interaction. Similarly, elementary child's sensitivity to justice and moral judgment, to things being fair, right? It often emerges during these elementary years, and it's this heightened awareness of things that are just and fair. And it often leads to really passionate debates over rules and right versus wrong. Um, Elementary children will definitely say something if you're following the principle of do as I say, not as I do, right? Well, that's not fair. Why do you get to do it and I don't? So those are some things you might have noticed that are sensitive periods in elementary children, even without a deep knowledge of Montessori philosophy and pedagogy. Recognizing some of the other sensitive periods that occur during the elementary years might also be easier than you think. I want you to consider if you've ever noticed a child from ages 6 to 12 deeply absorbed in some imaginative game, or if they're crafting really intricate stories, creating other worlds. Their ability to really lose themselves in these abstract scenarios highlights the sensitive period for imagination, which occurs at this time in their lives. And it's this type of creative exploration that brings them such joy. They're really trying to develop this understanding of reality and fantasy. Likewise, that focus on justice we talked about might lead to really strong emotional reactions when they perceive unfairness or a lack of equity, even in really small interactions. So these things are kind of our keys. It's kind of a light going off to us, right? Oh, this is the child trying to meet their needs at this age. Some other characteristics of these sensitive periods for elementary children are deep concentration. So if they're trying to learn how a government functions or how an ecosystem works, this really intense focus is a sign that a child is meeting a sensibility. Compulsive or repetitive behaviors might also surface when a child is fixated on learning this knowledge or mastering these skills. And interrupting a child during a sensitive period can also result in a really intense emotional response. This is another key or clue to us that the child is indeed in part of a sensitive period. So let's say that you have a child who's role playing a complex scenario with their peers and they're abruptly stopped, right? Maybe you need to call them in for dinner or it's time to go to school. They're likely to feel really frustrated or disoriented, even. Similarly, if you disrupt a moral debate, maybe a child is having some kind of debate with a sibling or another parent, if you ignore that need to negotiate those social rules, the child is likely to have a really strong emotional reaction. And attuning to these moments of heightened emotional response helps us as the adult to understand the child's natural development, to see that they're in this period of sensibility, and then to provide them opportunities that they can further explore these interests. So we're looking for repetition, intense focus and concentration, compulsive behaviors, and then those intense emotional responses if a disruption occurs. So, as we were just saying, sensitive periods manifest themselves in two really distinct ways. The first is positive, and the second is negative. Signs that a positive manifestation is occurring are those things we've been talking about, that intense concentration, intense focus, that joy, this tremendous activity and repetition. These are signs that a child's needs are being met by the environment and that they're able to really explore their interests and explore that sensibility that they're craving. In a negative manifestation, however, the child's environment is not providing them with what they need to develop that sensitive period. Or we are stepping in and providing an obstacle. We're stopping that exploration from happening. And this is when we often see that frustrating or emotional response from the child, right? These big feelings. So, a lack of a prepared environment, are interruptions. These things are preventing the child from accessing the materials and the resources that they need to quelch this thirst for knowledge. And so we see those emotional responses in this negative manifestation. So, when do sensitive periods occur? The onset and the length of duration for each sensitive period varies with each individual child. However, they do occur within a fairly predictable period of the child's development. So, we, in a previous session, talked about sensitive periods that occur on ages 0 to 6. And today we're honing in on the sensitive periods that occur from ages 6 to 12, or in what Maria Montessori called the second plane of development. The end of a sensitive period is just as observable as the beginning, right? So you can tell when a sensitive period is happening, as we've discussed, that intense joy, focus, concentration, and then that fatigue and disinterest that arises, or even this sense of peace once a child has accomplished something. All are cues to us that a sensitive period has occurred. It's also important to note that sensitive periods are transitive states. And what I mean by that is once the aim of a particular sensibility is accomplished, the period will disappear. Sensitive periods are never relived or regained, and they don't occur in a specific order. So a child, sensitive exploration of sensitive periods could be very different from another's, even though they're in the same plane of development. And a child might even be experiencing multiple sensibilities at one time. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that might look like momentarily. But what I want to mention right now, because something I just said carries a lot of weight, is that sensitive periods are never relived or regained. And as a parent or a caregiver or educator, that can feel really heavy because we might worry that if the child misses that sensitive period, that they're not able to grow and develop in the way that they need. So if a child misses a sensitive period, it doesn't mean that the child won't master that skill. The sensitive period doesn't happen again, right? It's not relived or regained at a different time. So we talked about socialization. Let's say that need isn't met in the elementary ages. Perhaps it's met when the child becomes an adolescent or an adult. It can still happen that they engage in socialization, but it's not going to be this unquenchable thirst to engage in socialization with one's peers. It's not going to be this intense joy and focus and repetition on that skill. So what it means is that it will just involve less joy. The process will be less joyful. It will likely require more time or more effort on the child's part to reach that mastery, to feel like that sensibility has been accomplished, that they've met that need. And you can think about this similar to the process of when we as adults attempt to learn a second language. For a very young child, they just absorb language, even if it's not their native language. They absorb language from their surroundings without any trouble at all, just very organically. But for even an elementary age child, but especially for us as adults, we really have to try very hard. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of time for us to navigate that process. And that's because in that first plane of development, 0 to 6, children are in a sensitive period for language. That's what's happening naturally for them. It's this intrinsic motivation, this draw to exploring language that disappears and does not return. Maria Montessori stated that when the sensitive period has disappeared, intellectual victories are reported through reasoning processes, voluntary efforts, and the toil of research. And from the torpor of indifference is born the weariness of labor. And all of that advanced vocabulary just to say that you absolutely can meet these needs and explore these areas after a sensibility has ended. But it's going to take a lot of voluntary effort, a lot of dedication, a lot of time and practice. There's this toil and this word of indifference. So it's not going to be this intense joy that children have or that adolescents have, right? If you're thinking about their sensitive periods when they're in this period, but it is still possible. So don't get too down on yourself if you feel like you might have missed some of these with the children that you work with or care for. All right, so now let's really get into the exciting stuff, which is exploring what these sensitive periods are for elementary age children. The first is justice and moral judgments. We talked about that a little bit already, but it's this profound sensitivity to right and wrong, right? Children at the elementary ages are almost obsessed with the idea of fairness and equitable treatment. At this stage, they're really eager to engage in these lengthy discussions about moral concepts, ethics. They have this natural curiosity to understand what we consider as adults these really complex ideas. And so, this sensitivity provides a really unique opportunity for us to guide and nurture the elementary child's developing sense of morality. If we handle this time with care and respect, then this sensitive period will allow children to really emerge with a strong sense of compassion, a really well formed conscience, and this ethical framework that will guide their future actions and decisions. We want to encourage open dialogue. That's a way we can support this sensitive period. We want to listen to the child's perspectives, hear them out, and listen to what they're saying they believe is unfair, and help them find solutions that they do feel are more just, and help them navigate these moral dilemmas they have when things do seem unjust and find a way to support them through those feelings. Uh, uh, one moment back on that, I wanted to share that one way this happens in a Montessori classroom and in other classrooms as well is by involving the children in developing the class rules. You can do this at home as well. Sit down together as a family, have a family meeting. Some classrooms call them their rights and responsibilities, right? These are the things I'm responsible for, or that we're all responsible for. And these are our rights. These are the things that we are able to do without question. So those things might be moving our bodies. They might be meeting our biological or physical needs, right? Being able to get a drink or to use the restroom. We don't need to ask to do those things. Those are our rights. Our responsibilities are to do so in a way that are respectful to ourselves and to others and to the environment, right? So that it's this balance where children learn how to become independent, right? And really embrace this idea of what is a natural right and then what is their responsibility. And that creates this internal sense of justice and morality, and they have buy-in. They're more likely to follow the rules because they helped create them. They feel more just to them. Between these ages of 6 to 12, children are also really deeply engaged in developing friendships, like we talked about, exploring those social relationships with their peers. This often involves forming cliques and clubs, and each of these often has their own unique codes of ethics. Goes back to that sensitive period for morality and justice, right? It's that overlapping we talked about of more than one sensitive period happening at a time. And while it is important to monitor for unhealthy dynamics in these relationships, it's really important to um, give the children the autonomy to explore these rich opportunities independently. We can support this natural sensitivity by creating an environment where collaboration and cooperation are really encouraged and are thriving. So in a Montessori classroom, we really recognize the importance of group processes and this incorporated cooperative learning. So we have lots of projects where the children are able to work in partners and small groups. And it's not only that they get to work together, but we also allow this conversation to happen naturally during what we call the work cycle. So that's that morning time and then again in the afternoon when they're in the classroom doing independent projects or working together in partners or small groups, unless the socialization is a distraction, a disruption to the work of others, right? We allow that to happen because the child is meeting their need. We recognize that it's something that's absolutely crucial for their development. And so we allow that to happen. Again, going back to those rights and responsibilities, as long as it's not a hindrance to others or a hindrance to them completing their work. The third sensitive period is a money and economic value. Elementary age children often show a really strong interest in money and its value. They're fascinated by counting money, exploring how it's earned, imagining what they might buy if they earn that money. And while their understanding might still be developing, this natural curiosity provides a really excellent opportunity to introduce some foundational concepts about money and the economy. So you can engage children in real world experiences. In the Montessori classroom, we often involve children in budgeting for different classroom projects, right? This is the amount of money that we have. What can we buy? What are the cost of these items? A good example is we had a bake sale one year because the children wanted to have a pizza and a movie day. And we talked about needing the money to buy the pizza, and they came up with ideas for how we might raise that money. And they decided on a bake sale. So they were involved in deciding what the items would sell for as far as the cost for each individual item. They sold the goods, they counted the money afterwards, they figured out how much money they'd earned. And then we talked about how much money we had to spend, right? And how much each pizza was, how many slices of pizza we needed. So involving them in that way, or if it's a child that you care for or one of your own children, involving them in this process when you go out into public to a store, right? Take money with you and allow them to pay for an item, to count the change. You could role play this in the classroom or at home, purchasing an item in a store or running a store. Give them the opportunity to fill both roles of the cashier or the person who's selling the goods and the person who's purchasing them. There's also a really deep interest, fascination for children in exploring the history of the economy or the history of currency and its purpose. So encouraging research in that area and helping them understand how currency came to be, how the economy came to be, is also a really neat way to help them explore this sensibility and overlaps with another sensitive period we'll talk about in just a moment related to history. The next sensitive period is the abstract use of the imagination. So during the elementary years, children are really firmly grounded in reality. And that's because the first 6 years of their life, that is where they formed the basis. They were only able to see the world for what it was. So they have this firm grounding in reality from 0 to 6, from the first plane of development. And now they're able to expand their thinking, right? Their imagination is able to expand into the world of the abstract. This sensitive period is marked by this really incredible ability to envision possibilities beyond what the child is experiencing in their day-to-day life, right? Their immediate experiences. With this imaginative capacity, children can explore really complex concepts, things like the origins of the universe, the interconnectedness of ecosystems, the workings of historical civilizations, right? Studying the ancient past and thinking about how those civilizations lived and got along with one another, associated with one another. Imagination becomes this really powerful tool for learning because it enables children to make connections, to solve problems, to think really creatively. Montessori education really harnesses this sensitivity by presenting lessons that spark the elementary age child's curiosity and allows for this abstract exploration. So we have what we call the great lessons, and these are five stories really about different things. It's about how the universe came to be. It's about life on Earth. It's about the coming of humans and what sets us apart from other animals. And then we have the coming of numbers, or the story of mathematics, as it's often called as well. And then the same for language, the coming of writing or the history of language. And so it really gives children this jumping off point of how things came to be in our world, and encourages their imagination so that they are empowered to continue to explore and to think creatively. And storytelling is often incorporated in a lot of what we do in the Montessori classroom because it appeals to this sensitive period that the elementary age child has. The elementary age child often enters a sensitive period as well for learning how tools and machines work. They show this curiosity not only about complex machinery, but also for simpler, more practical tools. They're naturally curious about how tools are used. They're fascinated by how and why machines work. Even processes that you might not think about that relate to tools and machines, like cooking, sewing, knitting, cross stitching, right? All of these things really are simple machines, simple tools. And the elementary age child often finds great joy in mastering these hands-on skills and figuring out how these tools and machines work. And this curiosity really provides a wonderful opportunity to introduce practical skills to the elementary age child to appeal to this sensitive period. So helping them learn how to use basic tools, helping them learn how to use a hammer to fix something or to hang a picture on the wall, helping them learn how to disassemble and reassemble simple devices, letting them experiment with gears and pulleys, learning about different technological innovations, again, connecting to that interest that they have for history, learning about how different tools came to be and how they've changed over the years. You can allow them to engage with practical tools, right? Things like a hand mixer, a needle for and thread for sewing, operating a hand drill. All of these things give children this sense of independence and accomplishment and appeal to this sensitive period for the use of tools and machines. I've alluded to this sensitive period a few times now and how it can also take place at the same time, side by side with some of the other sensitive periods we've explored. So during the ages of 6 to 12, children also develop this enhanced ability to understand the concepts of history and time. And their grasp begins first with a study of the recent past and the present, and then gradually expands to include the distant past and imagining even the future. That's where that imaginative sensitive period comes into play. Um, and it's this imagination that allows them to explore those events in the past and in the future far beyond what they see in their day-to-day life. So that's that overlap again between the two. They're able to visualize the lives of people who came before them or imagine what the future might hold. They can see themselves as this as part of this larger timeline, right? Of life, the existence of life on Earth as a whole. And again, by presenting these engaging stories, timelines, hands-on activities, it's that overlap of the sensitive period for imagination with storytelling, the sensitive period for tools and machines. We can help children to really start to connect to the flow of time and to gain a deeper understanding of history on Earth. That connects really naturally to the next sensitive period, which is this sensitivity to human culture and for children determining their place within the human family. They're really naturally curious about other people, about other cultures, how they live, and really easily drawn to forming positive or even prejudice attitudes towards these other peoples. And that's where it's so crucial that we step in and provide them this really unbiased perspective of other people and help children to see their commonalities. There's a lesson that we present in Montessori elementary classrooms called the fundamental needs of man or the fundamental needs of humans. And it really shows us that no matter where we live, when we lived, right, whether it was in the past or in the present or even in the future, we all have these same needs that unite us as living beings. And so it really helps them to see that connection and the way that they are similar to and different from other human beings. Um, we talk about food, shelter, companionship, and the diverse way that these needs are met all over the world. And the way that we do that are through these rich cultural studies. So we have that initial lesson, the fundamental needs of human, but then we really encourage children to explore the richness of human diversity. So you can have them research a specific culture. Maybe you're able to visit different places and learn about how people in other places of the world live. With technology, especially after the pandemic, there's lots of really rich opportunities for children to immerse themselves in other places around the world and to see other things that they might not be able to see in person. Exhibits in different museums, different landmarks around the world. So that's a really great opportunity, although maybe not as rich of an experience as being there in person and feeling the immersiveness and expansiveness of those places and those really fascinating things that we have, but still a great way to meet that need for this sensitive period. The next is a sense of how the world works. And again, this connects really naturally to the last few sensitive periods we've been talking about. Elementary age children are really naturally driven to explore the world and to uncover how it works, its scientific principles. They'll experiment, they'll ask endless questions. They really want to seek to understand how the world is operating. If we provide them with opportunities to explore these questions and we give them a foundation with sound scientific laws, children are able to develop this inner picture of a logical and orderly universe. It empowers them to see connections, to solve problems, and to really build this realistic perspective of the natural world. Without this, because of the sensitive period for imagination, children can remain fixed on fantasy, magical thinking, imagining basic physical laws can be suspended, right? That they're able to stop that from happening. So we really want to support this sensitive period by encouraging them to inquire, giving them hands-on experiments, presenting the fascinating principles that govern our universe so that they can balance this imagination with a really concrete understanding of how the world works. Okay, so as I alluded to in the beginning, I love to share a little reminder here at the end with some inspiration from Dr. Maria Montessori herself. So she shares the sensitive period. It comes for a moment, but its benefits last for a lifetime. So for parents, caregivers, educators who are practicing Montessori or who want to embrace more Montessori philosophical underpinnings in their work with elementary age children. Understanding these sensitive periods offers us really valuable insight into a child's natural development. By recognizing and responding to these moments where they have this heightened sensitivity, we can start to provide them with opportunities that align with their needs and interests. And that then fosters this deeper sense of engagement and this really beautiful joy and learning and exploring. So, whether it's in a Montessori classroom, in your home, this understanding will help you to be attuned to how a child is evolving, how their capabilities and curiosities are changing, and then to create an environment that allows them to explore those interests and to really have their needs met. Before I open it up to final questions, because I want to give you plenty of time, I just wanted to say thank you for joining me. Hopefully, you found a lot of useful information about sensitive periods today and how you can nurture them in the children that you work with and care for. My contact information is here. If you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email after today's presentation. You can connect with me on LinkedIn or social media. And my website is also there where there's some other education and parenting related content.